Welcome to Ideas in Action, the official University of Southern California podcast. This show was recorded live on USC's campus.
We are the theater people, so we're not really going to be formal at all. We're trying to act formal because we're in this beautiful, wonderful space, Annenberg. But welcome. It's a pleasure to have you. How many of you are theater people? Yes, we love this. We love this. We are in with such an extraordinary city for theater. You know, everybody is so tired of me saying this, but I say this to students every day. We live in a city of 4 million people who speak 224 different languages. How exciting, how extraordinary, right? And there's something about the way we access theater, the way we access expression. And at this moment in the culture, I feel like, you know, even on our own campus, just to be fully transparent, we're having a lot of issue, right? A lot of drama, a lot of crisis. The theater is one of the last of those public spaces where I hope we can all engage with each other and have difficult, exciting, romantic, but also conflicted conversation. That's what the theater does. It brings us together and it wrestles with the question of the day and how we move forward. And so I'm very excited to be here today. I rushed over from the Gary Marshall Theater in Burbank, where my MFA students are doing their readings, so they're all hating on me. So it's nice to walk into a room full of such love. Do you see how I'm totally trying to pull it out of you? Yeah, it's a theater trick. So it's great to see you and great to see so many people. Thank you so much. This wonderful panel is composed of artists and scholars and thinkers and active people who are trying to really see the future of what we are doing in our field with our practice, with the craft, but also thinking in kind of bigger ways about what is the big change that's happening. We've come out of a pandemic, and not everybody's come back to our theater. So that's a big, gigantic reality, right? Our theater-going habit has changed. The way we investigate the art is different. And so one of the joys of being here today is to hopefully reignite in all of us a kind of passion for the arts and what people are doing. So it's a thrill just very quickly to say that my wonderful colleague, Sharon Carnegie, is here. Dr. Carnegie is here. My wonderful colleague, Dr. Rena Heinrich. The wonderful set designer, Maureen Weiss. And the artistic director of Center Theater Group, Snehal Desai. I always say Desai. Is that the way? Oh, okay, cool. So I said it right. So welcome. And what I'd like to do is hear from our panelists and let them tell you, because what we really want to do, the real subtext for those of us theater people in here, is we want to sell some books. Yeah? So let's hear about these authors who have books, because they're really kind of extraordinary and amazing. But I want to start with Maureen, because there has been a collective book that's been put together that is very, very exciting. And thrilling for me because something is shifting in the field. We think about the shifts in the field in terms of plays, because I'm a playwright, but also what's going on backstage is just as important. Who are the movers and the shakers? Who are the people that are making the decisions? Who are the people that are making the art, the expression? And Maureen is part of a wonderful collaborative book that focuses on women designers in the field. It is really fantastic. It also includes our colleague, Sybil Wickersheimer, who's not here today, and some amazing, the Tony-winning set designer, Rachel Hauk, and so many. But I thought we would start with you, and maybe as we go through, please tell us about the book, but also one of the things that I enjoyed about the investigation in this book is how much I learned about how the craft had changed. So in the making of the book, was there like sort of wonderful surprises for those of you who are active practitioners also in your collective thinking that popped up for all of you? Is that too crazy a question?
Do I just talk?
Yeah. Can you hear it? You
yeah.
can hear it, yes.
It was mostly surprises. Like the whole journey was surprises. And I'll tell you a little bit about my journey to the book. And then I'll tell you what the really big surprise, and it was mostly the speaking out that happened. But, you know, I'm an unlikely author. In no way did I ever set out to write a book or be an author. I like to paint things. So when I was approached because I was a professor of set design. So they were interested in speaking to me because I was a woman and I was in the field. And I think they wanted a book about women in set design. And I didn't want to take that on alone, so I went to Sybil Wickersheimer, who is at USC, and I would never have done this without her. But we sat down and we really thought about what that meant to write a book about women in set design. And in the end, we decided we didn't want to call it that, but we did want to call out the book that we had as undergrads. And it was the only book available when I was an undergrad and studying. And it was called American Set Design. And there were two of them, American Set Design 1 and American Set Design 2. And American Set Design 1 had one woman, and I think one person of color. And American Set Design 2 had two women, and I think two people of color. And so Sybil and I said, let's just take that book and twist the percentage. So we do have one man. And we have Ed Haynes, who is an amazing designer. And then we have a 40-60 ratio of designers of color. So that was sort of our intent. That was what we knew. We didn't know that as we were writing this or beginning the stages of it, that the pandemic would hit. This turned out to be a gift because it put pause on theater, which meant that designers who normally are so busy, which is why Sybil is not here, she is in New York City on tech, which means she is exhausted. So she's not here, but we never get to talk to each other because you're going to hire one set designer and one set designer is going to be in the room. So we actually got to have these conversations. So we decided that we didn't know what the book was going to be, but we were going to reach out to people we'd never reached out to before. And I just had a list of a wish list of people that I wanted to talk to in the field. And that's what we did. And so we reached out to them and we asked them a survey questions originally. And so one of the big designers was Christine Jones. And so I'm going to just read a little bit of what came back from her survey that started us and our momentum of what we were going to learn from these amazing individuals. So this is a quote from Christine Jones. And Christine Jones is probably most well known for the Harry Potter plays. So she designed all of those. And she says, I always tell people that if I wasn't a stage designer, I wouldn't be any other kind of designer. I am not in this for how it looks. I am in it for how it feels. I think, like athletes, you can tell when you are in the flow, and you get there by putting your whole self in. Designing is about turning an emotional and intellectual response into a physicalized space for people to play in. You have to build it out of air, but it has to carry the weight of the world you made. It needs muscle, both of the heart and the hands. When Sybil and I received this from a survey, we were like, let's go. And we just invited, so we curated conversations based on topics. And if you go through the book, you'll see that there's chapter headings. And each of the conversations, when we set them out to the designers, we sort of curated who would be in each conversation. We sent out questions that they could think on before entering the conversation. So we have chapters, Dialogue Between Decades, which is early career designers, as well as designers that have been in the field for years, and patterns and systems. So we didn't know what we would find when the conversation started, but it turns out, even though we're techies, we like to talk a lot. So there were 3-hour conversations, and Sybil and I recorded all of them. And that meant that our book turned into big editing sessions of these conversations. One of the first conversations, and I think it was primary on our mind, even though it was the pandemic, we were really questioning what we were going to teach our students. What is this field, and why does it matter? And so one of the first conversations, I remember Marcia Ginsburg, who's a designer, she came in and she just tore theater apart, which was scary, right? So her first comment was, I think that one of the huge issues about American theater is that it's really monolithic, right? And so from there, every designer in that conversation wanted to talk about how we were going to dismantle this monumental institution. And in that conversation was a designer, Andromachy Chalfant, and she was a professor, and she's an amazing designer. Her designs are beautiful. But she was a professor at the time, and by the end of the book and the end of the conversation, she had left education. She said, I can't do it anymore, right? There's so much that came out, going back to your question, about what it is we do that isn't economically sustainable. It is emotionally sustainable. But you mentioned Rachel Hawk. This was a brave moment in one of our conversations where probably the most famous of our designers said, I just want to ask you all, who is making a living at this?
Can I just interrupt really quick? Because I think this is a really good point. There's a part of this, it's business, and this is the way I understand it. When I go to regional theaters, you meet these amazing designers who do extraordinary sets for you, but they're also, in order to just be able to make a living, have to take so many jobs, right? So
yeah.
then you have assistants who help you, right? And then you have to maintain, if you love them and you love them that you want to grow with them, you have to maintain the assistants, right? So I compare it a little bit to one day meeting Frank Gehry,
Yeah.
the architect, and him telling me, there's a moment in architecture where you decide whether you're going to do your atelier, right? You're going to continue and move the field forward, or you're just going to take job after job after
Yeah.
job after job to keep your company alive. So that's that's a truism in that book in a very, very big way, right?
It wasn't, and it wasn't that we didn't know it. It's that we never said it to each other. We never validated this in this way. And so a lot of the book was trying to figure out how to make this sustainable for our students. What are we going to do for our next generation to make sure that they don't exist in the world that we're existing in, which is exactly, my assistants make the money, right? But I live as a teacher. And how do I teach? That just doesn't make sense. So there were a lot of hard moments, but the amazing moments came when we were inspiring each other. And I'm going to end with who I always end with, because if you don't know her work, you should. It's Abigail DeVille. And she just kept me going. She continues to keep me going. But she's sort of like, we're asking, is it a career? And I'm just going to read what she says. She's like, I think it's a career. I'm not sure, though. I don't know. Art or making things is an all-consuming force that ends up being your life's work, and somehow you squeak out money here and there. But thinking about it is like a long journey that's purposeful and meaningful, and not necessarily that you will be living in a big house on top of the hill kind of thing. But maybe at the end of it, that you made enough things that spoke to enough people, that spoke to enough moments in time. So I think if you can move in that time, if you can move in the present time here on this planet in a way that brings light or life or information or a meaningful kind of communication with other human beings around you, then what more could you ask for? And I don't know if set design is the thing, whether being an artist is the thing, or she responds to Sybil, what you're talking about, finding ways to broaden your practice during this time of the curtain, the pandemic, being down kind of things. We're creative beings, and we're moving and working in different ways. I'm always going back and thinking about James Baldwin, the Creative Process essay, and the last line of that essay where he talks about that the war of an artist with his society is a lover's war. And he does, at his best, what lovers do, which is to reveal the beloved to himself, and with that revelation, to make freedom real. Until then, thinking about if we're in pursuit of a kind of truth-telling or mirroring of society to itself, or creatively thinking about new ways we can frame old, tired conversations and meaningful ways where we can talk to each other, then that's a life's work. That's a real trajectory, and it doesn't matter if it has the label of a set designer or a visual artist or a costume designer or whatever, I think if it's meaningful, it has the potential to ripple. So I think that's what I gained from this book. I gained that information.
Can you tell us something in the movement right now that feels like design is going in a certain way? Is there something, metaphorically that you would say you see it as?
So I will say that I really had a lot of moments where I thought theater was changing, and I think we can all discuss that in some way. And then we came back from the pandemic, and we noticed that the structures still aren't moving that much. So conversations are happening more than they happened before.
Yeah.
And we are speaking out more to each other Instagram, all social media is helping that. Do I think that we are prioritizing the right things yet in telling our stories? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Everybody wants to break down all of the boundaries between the arts, right? And that we all sort of are intermingling stuff. But doing that means that you actually have to get people talking that didn't talk before, and that's not happening.
Yeah, I think it's one of the biggest challenges in the field. I'm looking at Lynn, who works with Cornerstone Theater Company, an extraordinary puppeteer, one of the master puppeteers of the country, and she lives here in Echo Park. So, hi. But I was just thinking, I was inspired by this thought that, I work with the company in San Francisco called the Magic Theater. And, it's the theater that Sam Shepard started and la, 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 la. And one of the things that they do, which I think is so extraordinary, is that it took a while for my ego to get used to it, but first rehearsal is like a company dinner with all the designers, all the crew, everybody, right? And then they start with the choreographer. So you start with movement before language. And you're like, when are you going to get to my play? Because I thought that's what we were here for. But, actually it is a communal conversation that's starting to happen. And one of the ways that we can take care of each other is to say, we know how much it costs to build these sets. We know what it costs to make all of that work happen. How do we bring you into the room in a way that feels that we're actually still engaging in your art form in a way that feels real to you, too? Yeah.
And that is spoken about by a few designers, that they used to the practice was much more we're all in the room together.
Yeah.
And more people are on less time.
Yeah.
And so we're never in the room together anymore. So I hope that it goes back to that, because that is where it happens. Like, you cannot truncate that part of our process, because when you do, it's just this, you don't get great results from it anyway, but it's money that they're lacking, right? Yeah. And there's a lot of talk from designers in here about, like, when you see the budgets for our shows, like how much you're spending on materials versus how much you're spending on the people. And it's really hard to deal in those budgets.
Ooh, thank you for that. That's really sobering, but it's exciting too. And I dig the glasses. Thank you. So I want to move on, because one of the things we're talking about here is also our connection to the Academy, right? So I'm a playwright who does the same thing you do, right? You work at LACC, and I make my living in the Academy so that I can go out and do my art around the country, right? So I think that's one of the realities many of us have faced. But we have great scholars in the field, and Sharon Carnegie is one of those scholars. She was my tenure chair, and she was really hard on me, and then I've learned to love her. But I do want to say that Sharon has focused on the work of Stanislav.
Him for his CV.
I'm a playwright. We don't know deadlines, right? So you've been focusing on Stanislavski for a long time, but also this new book is talking about acting in a whole other way. And can you talk about what you're attempting to do with this new book for us?
Yes. Can you hear me if I don't use the
I think they're recording it.
Oh, you're recording it. Okay. Because I'm a little bit worried about juggling things. So let's see how this goes. Well, I want to start by telling you that since the mid-20th century, the method has been misattributed to the work of Stanislavski, who is a Russian actor, director, founder of the Moscow Art Theater. And many years ago, because I started as an actor, and when I was an actor in New York, I came face to face with this reality of this misattribution. I was also studying Russian at Columbia at the time, and my acting teacher asked me to look up a particular term in Stanislavski's books, and that request literally changed my life. Because, first of all, if I put the English translations next to the Russian books, they didn't look anything alike. They were half as long in English, and in English, Stanislavski seemed a real patriarch, an authoritarian, a hard ass, quite frankly. And in Russian, it was so much more interesting. He was funny. He put women into, in 1938, he actually put a woman who was 19 into the role of Hamlet and told her, this will be your university. He was far from the authoritarian and patriarch that we came to believe from mid-20th century. So it became my mission as an actor and then as a scholar to introduce people to this Russian Stanislavski that I liked very much more. And so my first book, Stanislavski in Focus, began that. But this one, my latest book, it's called Dynamic Acting Through Active Analysis, uncovers the last chapter of his life and work when he was hemmed in by Soviet censorship and disinformation such that we really never got to know who he was. This was the 1930s. This is important because we're living in a world right now that has similar disinformation that we're coping with. In his case, all his books, including the ones that you can read, were censored. And much that was interesting was left out. I won't go there right now because I'm trying to get to the end of his life. And during the last 4 years of his life, he was internally exiled by Stalin for political views about art that were against socialist realism and against the atheism of the state. And so he was working behind closed doors. And during this time, he developed a new way of rehearsing that I have come to believe is exactly what we need today as actors in the 21st century, because it builds flexibility of mind, heart, spirit, body into actors. And I think that today's actors need this more than ever because we're facing radical changes in our profession and new dramaturgies that are and we're devising works. And he was doing all of this in the late 1930s, and we didn't know. Active analysis is the technique that it's called, dynamic acting through active analysis. And in a nutshell, what it does is it asks actors to study, and I'm underlining that word study, the interpersonal relationships between characters in plays or devised pieces before actors ever look to memorize text or to set blocking, so that when they get to the text, they know what all the options are there for them. And they do this through an improvisatory etude, coming from the French word to study. So they study the text by getting away from the text and effectively creating the text anew as if they were the playwright. Now, I also wanted to introduce in this book, it was very important for me to have Maria Knebel's name on the cover because she was his last assistant, and she was responsible for keeping this work alive. He was in internal exile. None of this could get out. And she made it her mission to keep this work alive. During the 30s, 40s, and into the 50s, she was taking trusted actors, directors, students down into basements to teach them this, to keep it out of the public sphere. And when times changed, she started to teach it openly. She wrote 6 books about this, and by the end of the 20th century, she had completely revived Russian theater through a series of directors that she had trained, all trained in active analysis. But we still don't even know about this. For one thing, her books have not been translated. One book that is a collage of some of her writings came out in 2022. And I think this is an issue of gender discrimination because many of the actors who were working with her in the same time period have been translated twice and thrice. And she's not yet there. So all my work has been done in Russian. I also want to say that in 1991, the Soviet Union fell. And all of this was made available to us. And yet we still don't know it in this country. Why? Because I think the method has so dominated our discourse, and our idea of Stanislavski is still stuck in the 50s, that we haven't taken a second look. So that is my mission with this book. I think it's a good read, guys. I think it's a good read because I wanted to break out of scholarship. The first part is written like a murder mystery, which I am addicted to. And it's really looking at the mystery on Leontovsky Lane, which is where he lived in exile. The second part, I wanted to write a guide to the practice of this, but I didn't want to write a textbook that made it turn into rules, because then we would lose all the fun of it. So I wrote a play that follows 11 actors. They're real actors. They gave me their permission to fictionalize them. And I take you through a course in active analysis that teaches you the principles through a number of different kinds of text, and then ends with how do you use this in the profession today. And so I think it's a good read. If I have enough time, I would like to read an anecdote from the first part of the book, if I may, about the relationship between Stanislavski and Knebel. Do I have enough time?
Go for it. Do it. This is very fun, isn't it? I'm learning a lot.
So I'm going to take you back to November 1930, when Stanislavski and his wife, who was an actress, Lilina, had just come back from abroad. And in their absence, Maria Knebel, who was at that point an actor at the Moscow Art Theater, had secured the role of Sofia Petrovna Karpukhina in Dostoevsky's The Uncle's Dream. Knebel liked this role a lot. She envisioned Karpukhina as a judgmental gossip in the grotesque style, and she threw all her passion and creativity into the developing of this character. But as soon as Stanislavski saw her perform it, he removed her from the role and replaced her with Lilina, his wife. When she asked the theater's administration why, she was only told that Stanislavski likened her Karpukhina to a circus act. Knebel genuinely admired Lilina in the role. She loved the fact that Lilina was playing remarkably well, gossiping with inspired fervor, amazingly sincere in her righteous judgment. But she told another actor in the company, I really wanted to create a different kind of person. Months passed until one day when Lilina fell ill, Stanislavski requested that Knebel step back into the role. She adamantly refused. Moreover, she decided that should Stanislavski insist on her playing the role, she would leave the Moscow Art Theater. Upon hearing of this, Stanislavski immediately summoned her to him, and as she stood in attention in his presence, she felt like a pupil being questioned by the principal. Is it true that you want to leave the theater? It's true. Is it only because I insist that you play the role I took away from you? Yes. He looked closely at me, then invited me to sit down in the armchair and gently asked, what are you thinking? But tell me the truth. So she began by reminding him that he thought the work was a circus act. And then she told him how much she liked Lilina in the role. And then she stumbled and she couldn't go on. She was afraid. She thought he was going to say, child, you must learn from the great actresses. But instead, he simply asked her why she had stumbled in her explanation. So this emboldened her, and she said to him, you yourself taught us that we must do only what we can believe in. Otherwise, we embark upon a path in art that leads us to the copying of others' work. And even though I don't have Lilina's experience or her technique, I will not copy her. After a long silence, Stanislavski asked her to explain how she envisioned her Karpukhina by speaking as the character to him. So this is what she started with. So then I, Sophia Petrovna, drink 4 glasses of vodka in the morning and the same number in the evening. And then after my usual appetizer, my full soul feels so emboldened. And as Stanislavski listened to her, he began to react as if he were her acting partner, wagging his finger, nodding in sympathy. When it was over, Stanislavski told her, "Now I understand what you wanted to create, but I will reaffirm that you did not succeed with it on the stage. The grotesque in its style, with its extreme contrasts and sardonic humor, is the highest level of art, and I have tried to create the grotesque, and I have only succeeded with it once." Stanislavski then turned his attention to the style that was fashionable in those days. Nowadays, he said, we don't get the grotesque, we only get the grotesque in quotation marks. And that's awful. Was he thinking of the alternative theaters in which she was then directing? Finally, he gave her some advice. He suggested that she might try some irony. Next time you perform Karpukina, try something to cry about that the audience will laugh at, and you will understand the grotesque. Something had changed in their relationship during that conversation in 1930. By sharing her struggles and his struggles with each other about the grotesque, he was speaking with her he was speaking with her as a fellow artist, not as a student. And she realized that this took her to the very essence of his artistic conviction, and now I'm quoting her. It lay in his belief that any artistic style, no matter how radical its form, must be justified from within and not put on like a garment or an ornament. I left happy, recalled Knebel. And this shift in their relationship made it easy for her not only to return to the role of Karpukina, sharing the role with Lilina for several years, each of them succeeding in entirely different ways, but also later, when she became his assistant in his last studio, helping him develop a new way to rehearse, which would soon become, as she put it, her primary path in art. Thank you.
I love it. And if you see Sharon in the classroom, it's exactly that, the manifestation of this passion, which is fantastic. Just I was thinking a little bit about legacy, because I'm looking at Patricia Garza. We are part of a group called the Latino Theater Commons, and one of the first things we did when we gathered 10 years ago was to create the Fornes Institute. My mentor was a woman named Marie Irene Fornes, the great Cuban playwright. And, you know, it was very, very clear that unless you documented and saved all of the papers and interviewed all of the actors, all of her work would be lost, right? And so it's such a lovely thing to see what's going on right now, everybody donating their archives to universities more and more and more, which is great, exciting. So there's a lot of change going on in the field, and I'm very excited because Rena Heinrich is a huge part of it. I should just say that Rena is also directing a brilliant play right now by Christopher Chen at the Asia Pacific Museum in Pasadena, and it's a brilliant play that takes place in a museum, and they're actually performing it in the museum. Is that right? Yeah. And so, but I'd love for you to talk about, just because you're one of the leading scholars of Asian American, and I want to say forward art, right? You're really thinking about the modern, you're really thinking about our representation in the culture right now, what's going on in the world, and how is art kind of reflecting that. Do you want to, I'll jump in? Just talk into it, and then you'll know.
Is it? Oh.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you, Louise. And I would just like to say that Sharon Carnegie was also my promotion chair. And that question that your teacher asked you changed my life as well. So thank you for that, because of Sharon's work. My book is Race and Role, the Mixed Race Asian Experience in American Drama. And it was really a labor of love. And it's a question that began in with my artistic life as well. I started out as an actor as well, pounding the pavement in Hollywood in the 1990s, and I kept running into folks who were like me, who were mixed race Asian Americans, and one of the things that we kept running up against was, quote unquote, not being Asian enough or not being non-Asian enough. And it started me thinking, there's so many of us who are mixed race, who are artists, actors. Where are these playwrights? Who is writing these roles? And so then that became one of my lifelong questions. And just to say that I'm part of a collection of scholars that champion the notion of shape-shifting over passing. We see identity as malleable, ever-changing, as opposed to being fixed. And that identity construction keeps evolving, and how one identifies changes many times over one's lifetime. I like shape-shifting as opposed to passing because passing only denotes one move, and that tends to be from quote-unquote brownness into whiteness, and that if you make that move, you are an imposter, right? You are committing racial betrayal, when the truth is you should be able to identify with all folks in your, or all ethnic backgrounds in your parentage, right? But in our particular cultural landscape, we are sort of asked to subscribe to a monoracial social hierarchy, right? And one in which hypodescent dominates. And when I say hypodescent, what I mean is you are sort of forced to identify with the parent that is deemed sort of lesser in the social hierarchy, right? So I can't claim my whiteness, even though I am half white, is the idea, yeah. And then in this book, I look at shape-shifting and then talk about another phenomenon that happens with folks who are mixed race, which is one that I call double liminality. And what that means is that you are, quote-unquote, doubly liminal from multiple ethnic groups, two ethnic groups, racial backgrounds, or that could be more than two. To stand in the limen means to stand in like the threshold of a door, right, in the door jamb. So you can't enter the room in front of you, and yet you can't enter or go back to the room behind you. You are doubly liminal. You have to exist in that door jamb. So for example, if I were to identify as white, folks would say, well, she's Asian American. But if I identify as Asian American, folks would say, oh, but you're half white. You've been diluted somehow. You've been muddied by the fact that you are mixed. And so I put those two things in the book, and I really look at who my ancestors are in theater, who are mixed race, who've been making art, for over a century. And in my research, I was so happy to find out that I do have ancestors. And I start with a playwright named Sadakichi Hartman, who is half Japanese, half German, who writes a play about a man who has the same ethnic background as himself in 1890. And then I just wanted to, if I have time, read a couple of excerpts. So this is the beginning of the book, and then I'll read examples of shape-shifting really quickly. The third annual National Asian American Theater Conference was a historic event for the Asian American theater community in 2011. Held in Los Angeles, it was the first time the convening was presented in conjunction with the National American Theater Festival. The joint affair featured a wide array of artists, scholars, and activists from a variety of different Asian diasporic populations. The Consortium of Asian American Theaters and Artists, or CATA, presented the event with East West Players and Theater Productions, resident theater companies in Los Angeles, who served as the event hosts. Tim Dang, then the producing director of East West Players, spoke to Reed Johnson of the Los Angeles Times and asserted, "We tried not to say you're Asian, you're not Asian, you're only half Asian. If you would self-identify as Asian, we welcome you into our community." The festival itself thus provided an atmosphere of inclusion and sought to showcase the diversity of Pan-Asian artists within the community. Nonetheless, at the festival's culminating town hall meeting, an Asian American film actor stood up and addressed a theater full of conference and festival attendees, contending that mixed Asians, quote unquote, were not real Asians, contrary to Dang's statement. He vehemently maintained that these performers stole acting jobs from bona fide Asian Americans, and in his passion and agitation, it was clear that he believed he was speaking to his people. A Cornerstone Theater Company ensemble member and award-winning theater artist who was sitting next to me leapt to his feet and publicly confronted the actor, announcing his support of mixed-race Asian artists and calling them the future of the community. In the restored church, which had been converted into the theater space that held the oldest Asian American theater company in the country, he pointed directly at me in front of the entire assembly and acknowledged me as a member of the Asian American theater community. As a mixed-race Asian actor and director, it was the first time I felt publicly validated as an Asian American artist. This ambivalence in the Asian American theater community towards the acceptance of mixed-race theater artists illustrates, I think, the confusion and instability caused by the presence of mixed-race people. If leaders and members of the Asian American theater community themselves are torn about the validity of the contributions of mixed Asians within their midst, perhaps it does not seem feasible to assign multiracial playwrights and their plays to the Asian American theater canon. If they do not belong there, however, to which category do they belong? Western theater scholarship has placed, perhaps correctly, mixed Asian plays in the purview of the Asian American dramatic canon. However, as the foregoing kata example demonstrates, Asian American theater makers in the 20th and 21st centuries have often been reluctant to fully embrace these plays, their playwrights, and performers who would embody mixed-race characters as authentically Asian. The fear that mixed-race Asians would infiltrate a space like theater or film strictly reserved for real Asians reveals a subdominant discourse that others these multiracial subjects, and yet at the same time, mixed-race bodies are co-opted to fill quotas and act as racial salves without regard for a multiracial individual's unique personality. Can mixed-race bodies, performers, and playwrights intervene in the U.S. racial mechanism that would place them both outside Western and Asian American frameworks? Does the denial of the mixed-race body in drama point to larger ways that racial social structures have penetrated institutions like theater? Can mixed-race performers overturn racial hierarchies and enact racially transgressive performances through dramatized encounters with monoracial bodies on stage? Or has theater foreclosed its generative power and the promise of collective remembering through performance and theatrical texts to mixed-race artists, forcing them instead into a monoracial identity? And certainly I contend that that's not true. I just thought I would read this because it's kind of fun. I know we're talking about the future, but just in terms of, there's always this sense that mixedness is kind of a contemporary phenomenon, and we've been mixing since the Roman Empire. So I thought I would read two examples of shapeshifters in the early 20th century. So, as historian Kristen Moon recounts, mixed Asian bodies who were seen in vaudeville experienced discrimination from white Americans and monoracial Chinese performers because of their doubly liminal ethnic heritages, which I was talking about earlier. Their presence on vaudeville stages is a visual reminder of the evils of miscegenation and confirmed white spectators' fears of the threat of yellow peril. Performers like George Wong, who was of Chinese and Irish descent, provided physical bodily evidence of the dilution of the white race. Wong was an acrobat in the troupe The Seven Romas, who had been born in Hoboken, New Jersey. With quote-unquote light brown hair and blue eyes, Wong's shape-shifting racial phenotype confused an immigration inspector in Buffalo, New York in 1915, who noted that except for Wong's oblique eyes, his Chinese identity would have gone undetected. At the time, Wong was requesting permission to cross the Canadian-U.S. border to perform with the troupe in Toronto. His ability to shapeshift troubled easy categorization implemented by the Immigration Bureau, which recorded mixed-race individuals as Chinese and was wary of multiracial figures who attempted to enter the country as white. Perhaps the most striking tale of shapeshifting comes from the family history of vaudevillian Chinese acrobat and magician Long Tak Sam. Long married Austrian Leopoldine Rossler in 1908 after meeting her in Linz while on tour. The couple had 3 children, Poldy, whose stage name was Nisa, Mina, and son Frank, who was nicknamed Bobby. Long incorporated his daughters, who were only a year apart, into his traveling review, billed them as twins, and highlighted their mixed-race heritage to the delight of audiences. Considered, quote-unquote, one of the biggest acts in American vaudeville, Nisa and Mina toured and performed with their father and his company all over the world. Bobby was born 14 years later, after Nisa, in 1924, and was often left with his maternal grandparents in Europe while the family was on tour. In a staggering example of shape-shifting, Bobby's mixed-race heritage slipped under the nose of Adolf Hitler when the Fuhrer toured an Austrian boys' school in Linz, the desired future site of the Third Reich. Posing for a picture with an all-boys class in Austria, Bobby can be seen standing just above Hitler's right shoulder.
Oh my God. Oh, that's a good button. Thank you. Wow. Yeah, I'm thinking about shape-shifting now, right? Just what it means to in the culture now, but also in the arts now, and thinking so much about the legacy of how you move a field forward, right? And keep thinking about how the expression of the art changes everything. Wow. Well, I'm really excited to get to Snehal because we couldn't be talking about the future of theater without the artistic director of Center Theater Group, arguably the largest theater in the region, but also. To talk about vision and talk about future is really, really hard right now. And you're seeing it. We have an extraordinary community ecosystem of a lot of smaller theaters. And then we have not that many mid-size. And then we have these big theaters, right? And here you are in the biggest, and it's been a challenge. You just started. I am so grateful that he took on this job and walked into it right at the moment when you had to shut it down for a year. Right, which is so insane. But as you're listening to this and as you're kind of working to this moment in what's happening in the country, but and also especially in the city, what are you thinking about the future of theater? What is popping for you?
Great. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
First of all, thank you all. That was inspiring, and it's so great to. I mean, I think as we were walking over, we were talking about how as folks graduate, the first thing they gravitate towards is realism, right? And I keep thinking about how limited in the spectrum of storytelling we continue to be here, particularly in the American theater. It's so realism and naturalism tied, and then as soon as you break apart, there's so many different ways and avenues you can go in terms of storytelling. And I think as we continue to push ourselves, because if you want to see realism and naturalism, you could just see it in TV and film, right? We can't compete with that, especially on a budget, as we were talking about with scenic design. So it's kind of, how are we going to open up the avenues of experience and storytelling outside of what is just naturalism and realism? Because it's not about competition with other ways of storytelling. And then I keep always thinking about how also particularly here, storytelling for us continues to be a linear thing, whereas in most parts of the world, it's a cyclical thing, right? So when you tell a story, it's in cycles or in circles of being, because you believe your worldview is cyclical, but Western worldviews are still very linear. And I think as we continue, and that's where it's exciting about the work you do, because if you're someone who's mixed race, you're the embodiment of that clash of those two, you know what I mean, of those two cultural identities. And what's exciting is when then artists birth something new, you know what I mean, at that nexus. So there's a couple of things I was thinking about as we were doing this, and it's a question of, are there new barriers, or have the barriers kind of always been there? And then what is the path? So for me, the other thing was that conference you referenced in 2011. I think that's when we met. That is when we met, right? That was when we met, and that was a game-changing conference for me, because I've grown up on the East Coast, and I went to school on the East Coast for undergrad and grad, and I actually was in San Diego at the Old Globe for a fellowship, and a friend of mine invited me up for the TCG conference that was happening. And at the TCG conference, I met Tim, and Tim was like, oh, there's this other conference going on, you should join us. And at that time, there was also a South Asian pre-conference, and that was the first time I found myself in a room of other folks who looked like me, who shared the experience of being first or second generation, and what that also means. Because so much of our legacies are we've somehow fallen into this profession that no one else in our worlds growing up ever went to or felt an engagement with, but we just felt this calling that kept coming back to us. And then for me, it was seeing the legacy of Asian Americans out here, which is very different on the West Coast versus the East Coast. And East Coast Players is still, I think, the only Asian American theater with its own dedicated space. And so to see that was, it changed the trajectory for me of where I thought I could go in the American theater. And 2 years later, I moved out here because I was like, there's a different community. And what also excited me about LA theater was how many new storytellers there were and how many avenues for new plays. Because at that time, the model was much more economical. It had many issues. And I think what's happened since the pandemic now is we've seen a decrease in that. And I think the thing that we know is for artists is the only way you grow is by working, right? By doing the work, and production, getting to a stage of production is an important part of that development. And I think what happens to designers is it goes to the other extreme of you're doing 5 shows at a time. And so you're never allowed to sit in it. Versus for directors or actors or other folks or a playwright, you're usually doing 1 at a time in terms of that work. And so I think, this is kind of a roundabout way of saying, we're at this moment where what's great is you can question everything, and there's little resistance to wanting to change things up. And I think the boundaries are being broken, not only in terms of genres of storytelling, but also between the mediums of TV and film and social media and live experience. And I think what we realized during the pandemic, or what we found, which we all know, is that nothing can substitute for actually being physically in space with others. And that is a human need that I think, we all knew. But what happened is we lost the trust and the safety of being together with other folks. And so I think that's one of the first things that has to be reestablished.
And your vision for the theater as you're moving forward, are you able to sort of push against the notion of whatever the well-made play is? Or like I'm looking at Lynn, we're going to see a season of puppetry, right? Or can we, like what's happening in projections, for instance, is so extraordinary, right? But the way we hear a story in the theater, the way a story manifests, I love this notion you just brought up, because, at the moment when I really needed to change as an artist, I just went to the Guthrie Theater and I saw Nagala Mandala, right? And it was one of these plays that goes like this. Instead of like this, I think somebody dies and gets reincarnated as an animal, right? And so you're kind of like, wow, you could tell a story a different way, right? And so I just wonder, as a leader of this huge institution, is it possible to push forward towards what I think Los Angeles really is and struggles with, a world theater? How can we do that?
Yeah, I think we're thinking a lot about it at CTG, and I think some of it is tied actually to what is also happening in LA over the next few years. So we have, we are an international city, and we have the World Cup coming, we have the Olympics, and particularly with something with like the Olympics, you can't just be producing language-based work, right, for accessibility. And I think what will bring back folks is things that incite again that sense of wonder and awe that we have, right? I think the best night of the theater is when you feel like a child again. You're giddy, or you want to talk about something, or you saw, I think the other thing is, are you rediscovered beauty in new ways? And that can be physically based on design, or aesthetically between characters and storytelling. And I think that is something that will drive the scene, having those things over the next few years, because I think the big question for us is, how do we want to greet the world when it shows up here, right? And when we did the Olympics in '84, that was a lot of bringing international artists here. And I think the movement feels, how do we actually lift up the artists that are already here? Because we do have them in LA. And so what is that framework? And I think the framework of our spaces is oftentimes one of the challenges. And for me, it's just leaning into the tension, right? One of the tensions, for a lot of my career, was a burn it down person, right? I was like, there's no place for me, just burn it down. And now I have folks who are like, burn it down. And I was like, but I just got here, right? Like, we just got into the space, into the door. You know what I mean? Why are we burning it down? Why is there not ways we can change it? You know what I mean? Inside and outside. And I think that is also an inherent tension for so many of us, is that our careers are wanting to be at some of these spaces, and we get there, and sometimes the journey is, I'm here and okay, actually I don't need this space, or I want to do something else, or I am here and I do want this because I can do something different in these spaces. And so I think it's about leaning into that internal tensions and conflicts that we have, that will spark something new.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I was very, very privileged and lucky to be part of the mayor's office, is, convening these meetings to talk about what are we going to do, what is an LA Arts Festival. And one of the commitments from the mayor's office, which I thought was really interesting, was they're not going to build any new spaces to feature that art, because there are enough spaces in LA, we know, to feature art, right? And one of the exciting parts of that was, like, a space in LA that could feature great art is the Swap Meet in Compton. And you could go see a dance company there, and that would be very much in line with LA, right? So I think one of the exciting things that you're talking about is, how can we take this space that we have and now start to feature what's organic in the space, what's organic in the community, and see how it pops into our spaces in ways that feature what each of these scholars is talking about, right? How do we take that space into the future without changing it? Really, are we unpacking?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that's tied to this period is nostalgia is a very powerful intoxicant. And I think we're looking back over these, what was over the last 10 or 15 years through rose-colored glasses, and it wasn't great for everyone, and it wasn't inclusive for everyone, and it wasn't a model that was sustainable, but we were able to kind of gloss over it. And now we're at a time where I think that's what's exciting about what you're doing are you doing COT? Is that what you're doing? Yes. Yeah. Is that any space can transform into a theatrical space, right? Because all it takes is someone telling a story and someone else watching. And we live in a city where there's no shortage of space like other places, and you could do so much outside, but we've forgotten all those things that we kind of sparked during the pandemic. And I think if we're able to do that again, I think that will transform, because that will also transform the access of, like, you walking and seeing something and stumbling upon it is a different invitation than buy a ticket and come here at this time.
Yeah, I think Los Angeles, my controversial view of it is, Los Angeles doesn't have a center or a heart. Los Angeles is a series of border towns. We have 88 neighborhoods. Imagine if you featured a different performance in each of these 88 neighborhoods. Each one of us would change and expand in the way we think about it. Speaking of the good old days, the good old day of this panel is over. And so I want to thank you all. Man, this was really fast. I hope you got something out of this. I hope you will buy these books. I hope you will continue to support the art. And thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast and visit us at podcast.usc.edu.